Here is a modern Android UI built entirely in Jetpack Compose with validation, social login, and a sleek design. Now let me show you how to create this from scratch. Hello everyone, in this video we are building this beautiful and professional looking login screen. You can see the smooth gradient background, the email and then password field with icons, and then we have the password visibility toggle, we have form validation and a loading state, and it's fully responsive. By the end of this video, I'll teach you my number one secret for creating any UI. You will learn how to break down any UI design into compose components. You'll build this layout from basic composable to complex screen and create a nice looking and production ready UI. Let's get started. Before we touch any code, let's break down this UI into compose component. Let's identify what the individual components stand for and which Android component or composable should we use to create them. This is the most important skill for building UI efficiently. Starting from the outer container, this box with gradient background, it takes the entire full screen. And when you come to the main content, we have welcome text, the login text. Inside here, we have this white background which contains the input fields. And then we have icons. Aside that, this a text. We have a button. We have this divider that separates the button from the social logins. This too is a button. Then finally, this test for sign up. So it is important that you be able to identify the individual elements on your design. If you are able to identify this element, the next stage is to map these elements to composables or compose components. So let's do that. Let's see which elements in Android can we use to create this UI design. The first one is the gradient background. So the gradient background, we can use the box with modifier setting the background to brush. And then we have the welcome text. So that one, we have a component called text, which will style to be larger and bolder, the subtitle. And then we have this white background. We'll use the card component. Then we come to the input field. So for the input field, we have the outline field. Then we have the icons. For the icons, you use the icon component which you set on the input field. And then we have this visibility toggle. So we have a text component here which we can use the same text component here. So the login button, we have a component called button. We also saw the loading spinner when we were testing the application. So that one will use the circular progress indicator. And then you come to the divider. We have the horizontal divider. We have the social button, which will use outline button. And then finally, we have the sign up text here, which will use a text placed in a row. So when you are starting learning how to design a UI or you decide to build any UI, the first thing you have to do is identify the elements on your design. So if you are able to identify the element, then you map it to Android components. Once you have that mental model, it is easy to build your UI. So now when we turn this one into hierarchies, this is what we'll have. From the start, we have the box and then the column. That's what allow us to arrange this item vertically. And then we have our text, the subtitle, and then the card. Inside the card, we have the column for arranging all the items like this. So this mental model is very crucial when you are starting out building any design. So with this understanding, let's dive into code and see how we can build this beautiful screen from scratch. So create a new project, select compose. So this is for compose. Select empty activity, click on next, give your project a name. I'll call it login screen demo. Remove all these composables and then remove this one. Create a new composable called login screen. And then pass this composable to the set content. This is where we'll build our screen. From our UI, the first thing we have to build is the background, which is the box component with a gradient background. Inside this, you pass your box composable. So this is where our content will be. So now inside this bracket, this is where you set the modifier to apply the background color. So you use modifier You set it to this modifier that you receive here. So it takes the entire screen, so you have to make it fill the entire screen. So to do that, you use fill max size. Now let's set the background color. So you use background, pass the brush property, choose vertical gradient. Now inside here, you pass the list of colors. Now let's run application and see how it looks. This is how it looks. So compared to this, it's quite the same. But what we'll do next is we'll create a preview. Instead of running the application and waiting for it to complete, we can use the preview to take a look at what we are building. So to do that, use prev and then press tab. Name it login preview. Now you can call the login compose inside here and then close the emulator. Come to split mode. So we have this. So now let's build the content. So the content, will use a column because we'll arrange all the things vertically. So inside the box content, you use the column composable. Inside of it, we'll add this text and then the card, the welcome text. And then you pass the text, which is welcome back. So from the preview, this is our message, welcome back. Very tiny and then black, but from the design it is white and bold, so we have to style it a little bit. You bring a comma and then pass the color property. Give it a color of white. So you can see now our text is white. We have to make it bold and then increase the text size. So you use font size and set it to 32 SP. So text uses a unit of SP. And then we also want to make it bold. You use font weight. So now you can see that our text is bold and then large. Now we have to copy the same thing and replicate for the subtitle. We'll change the text to login to account. But we have to change the style for this one to 16 SP, and then this one will not be bold. We'll reduce the color a little bit because here it is transparent. So we'll set it, use a copy of that and then set the alpha 0.8 F. So when you look at our original design, the content is centered. So to do that, we have to pass modifier and then equal to modifier, the one with capital letters. And then set the content to fill mass size. So now set the vertical arrangement and horizontal alignment. Now our content is being centered. The next thing we can do is add some space between the two. So there's a component called spacer, and then pass a modifier to this. Set the height to 8 pixel dp. So this brings some space between the title and then the subtitle. The next on the line is this white container, which will use the card component. So below this text, start a card component. Now let's make the card background white. So you pass the modifier. Now we pass color. In order to see how the card looks like, it needs a content to show. So here we need a column. So this column will pass a modifier. Then it should fill the full width. Then let's set some padding around it, like 24. So we want the card to fill maximum width. We call the fill max width. We want the edge of the card to be rounded. So we'll pass rounded shape about 16 dp. Because we are styling the background, it is not showing, so it has color property. So pass the color property. It's called colors. Pass that one, and then you pass card default dot card colors. So select card colors, and then you pass there. So now pass container color, and then set it to white. So you can just copy this one there, and then remove the background color. Okay, so you see how it looks now. So we need to add some space between text and then the card. So you just copy this one and add it to this side. So you can increase this one to probably 20. Alright, now let's add the input fields. So the first one is the email. So we'll use outline text field. So this email, when the user enters the email, you want to save it in a variable. So you have to create this variable at the top, outside the box. So at the top here, you create a variable to store the email in it. So now whatever the user enters, we want to show it in the input field. So you use value is equal to whatever the user enters. And then secondly, when the user is typing, we want to save whatever the user is typing into this variable and then display it in the input field. So you pass that here. So whatever the user is typing, you assign it to this variable, and then this variable will update the input field. So now we have our first input field, but as you can see, it's also aligned to the edge, so we have to center it. So using the same principle we learned from here, you can align it horizontally. So we just copy this and then paste here in this column. The next thing we have to do is to add a label so that the user knows what he or she is supposed to enter here. So to do that, we have a property called placeholder. Placeholder which takes a text that says what? Enter your email. So the next thing you can add is the label. So this one also takes a text component. So I'll just copy this and give it to this, but you change it to email. This is a label. So now let's add the icon. So the icon is called leading icon. So you pass the icon. So you get an icon from the icons component, and then default, then email. So you have to set the content description. So there we have it. Now we have to give it this purple color. So to do that, you use the tint property and then set it to material theme, set color scheme, and then set it to primary. Beautiful. So now you can type your email. Let's do the password now. So just copy this one and then paste it below. Now to save whatever the user enters, you have to create a variable to hold the password. So just duplicate this and rename it to password. So change this to password and then enter password, and then this to password. So change this icon from email to lock. So now it's left with the password visibility icon, this guy. So that one, we use a property called trailing icon. So it also takes composable. So I'll just copy this and pass to it. But this is actually a button that allows you to show and then hide the password. So here we have to use icon button so that we can be able to handle the click. So you move this icon into the icon button. Now we have to handle the click event in this button. So we'll handle this click event. So now in order to toggle the password visibility, we have to use a variable to track it. Here we'll create a new variable called is password visible, and then the initial value is false. So here, when you click on the button, we want to either show the password or hide it. So to do that, we need to update this new variable we created. So you set is password visible to the opposite of is password visible. So anytime you click on it, this variable will be updated. And then now if it's updated, then we want to change this icon. Instead of just passing one icon, we want to use an if statement to check whether to show the open eye or close eye. So to do that, we'll convert this one to an if statement. So it's password possible, and then we show this, else we show this. We have an icon called visibility. Okay, so in order to get this icon, we have to add an external library. So come to your Gradle, the app level Gradle, and add the new library. It's called material icon extended. So just type extended, you get this, and then this one, material icon extended. So select that one. Now sync your project. Now let's import this one. So we have another one called visibility off. So let's make this one gray. So we want to add some animation as it toggles from visible to hidden. So it's called visual transform. If we'll use the visual transform and then set it to none. Else we call the password visual transform. Now we want to make it take the full weight of the card. So to do that one, you pass some modifier and then add some padding to the bottom. So we'll do the same for the email. Now let's add the button. So you have a button component that wants to requires on click event. So inside of it, you pass a text that says login. Give it a font size of 16. So give it a font weight of both. So we'll handle the click event for the login button later. So the next thing is the forget password. Let's add the forget password. So that one is before the login button. So I'll just copy this text and then place it here and then change it to forgot password. So that one too, it needs a color. So we can use the material color and then use the color scheme and then set it to primary. So the text, let's reduce it to 14 and remove the boldness, but we'll pass a modifier to style it a little bit. As you can see, it's aligned to the right. So to do that, you pass a modifier called align. Then you pass alignment end. So align it to the end of the screen. So now it has moved to the end of the screen. It's too close to the button, so you can give it some padding away from the button. Or you can use the spacer as well. Let's use the spacer. So you can remove the padding after giving it the spacer. So make it 24. So the next on the block is the divider. So you need to use another component called row. So inside this row, you pass the horizontal divider and then pass the modifier. So give it a weight of 1F. So repeat the same thing and then put a text between them. So I'll just copy this text and then paste here. So remove the font size and then the font weight and pass a modifier and then give it a padding, which will be horizontal padding of 16. So let's change the text to or. So put the preview inside this material themes. Then you do the same inside the main activity. So we need some space between the button and then it. For now, the text and then the lines are not aligned. So to fix that, we need that vertical arrangement. So this will put the whole thing in the center. If the text color is not changing, I think we can give it a color of color gray. Now the next thing is these two buttons. So you use outline button. So you also need that required on click. So we can fix this one later. So inside the body, you can show a text that says what? Continue with Google. And then we have sign up with Facebook. So I'll just copy the same thing and say Facebook. So I can make this text black, the other one blue. Then I'll copy the same thing, change it to black here. Now finally, this sign up text. So to build that test, we need a row. Inside that row, we need 2 tests. So I can copy this one and then paste it twice. And then I'll show here sign up. So it is white. This one is bold. So we can use the font weight. We can set the font weight to bold. And then we can ensure the color is white. So this is outside the card, so you have to cut it and then put it outside the card. So make sure you step outside the card. So you can collapse here and then paste it here outside the card. So this one also needs some space at the top. So we can copy the spacer and then pull here. So here we can also arrange everything in the center. So when you check, you see that the card is so close to the edges. So we have to give some little space away from the edges. So to do that, you come to the main column container. So inside here, you add some padding vertically. Okay, so this horizontal padding pulls the thing away from the edges. So now it's looking just like our design. So now the button has to fill the width. So let's look for that button. Give it a modifier. And then give it fill max width. So we can increase the height of the button a little by setting the height property to, let's say, 50. Think we'll do the same for these other buttons. So just copy this one. So set it on this button to increase their size a little. Okay, so we need some space between these 2 buttons. Get a spacer and then put it between them. So you can reduce it to probably 8 or 16. So let's use 12 to put some space between them. It is looking quite like our design. The only thing left is the validation. So let's run the application and see how it looks. And this is what we have. So you can try the login and all these buttons. And then the input field as well. The toggle is also working. So now we'll handle the click events for the login button. So to do that, we'll pass a callback through the login screen. So we'll call it on login click. When the login is clicked, we'll handle both the password and then the email. So you come to the button. When the button is clicked, we'll pass that function call on login click and then pass the email and then password that we received. So this is how you handle the login event. Aside that, you need to handle the logic here. So you can just say on login and then pass the empty function. So we do the same in the preview. So inside the preview too, you have to pass the handler. But before perform your login, you have to validate the user. You don't trust whatever the user enters. So make sure you check whether they've entered the right thing. So to do that, we'll create a function for checking that. So inside this composer, we'll just create a new function called validate and login. We'll create a variable to track whether it is valid or not and set it to true. We assume it is valid from the start, and then if we are checking if the email is blank, then we'll set the valid to false. Once it is blank, it means it is not valid. We can also check the same for the password. So finally, we check if the valid is true. Once it's true, then we can call the login method and pass the email and password. So now when the button is clicked, we'll rather call this function since we've called the callback inside this. Inside the button, now we'll pass this function to the button. If the user fails to enter anything or the wrong input, we want to show some message. So to do that, we have to display this message saying email required or password required. We'll create a variable to store this message, and then once there's an error, we show those messages. So you come to the top here and then create two more variables, one for password error, and then we have the email error. So initially we'll make them null. So once there's error in the email, we'll send a message of email required. And then the password to be said the password error. And then we set it to password required. Now, after setting the error messages, whenever the error occurs, we need to show it below the input field. From the input field, you can add another property called supporting text. We can animate how the text is shown, animate visibility, and set visibility to password error. And then the message, just copy this text and then reuse it. So here we show the text here. I think this one is password error. And we want to make this text color red. So you have to set its error property as well, and then make it error message, password error message when it's not now. And finally, you have to update it here too. So copy this one and paste it here and remove the now. So let's test this one. And now when you click on the login button without entering anything, you see the error message. So you can do the same for the email, and you can add other form of validations as well, but we'll keep it simple by just trying whether it is empty or not. So let me complete for the email. So now when you try the two, you get the error, email required and then password required. Enter the right information, for example, test. So now that you fill the input field, but once it is gone, you get the error. So we have to add a click listener to the forgot password. So to add a click listener to the forgot password, there's a property called clickable. So it allows you to add a click listener to any component in Compose. Just add it and then put the handler here. Make sure you use the one with the curly bracket. So inside the curly brackets, you can say on forgot password, forgot. So it's a function that you have to create. We'll just copy this, pass it to this on forgot password. So whenever unforgot password is clicked, then that function will be called. So you have to pass the same thing to the preview as well. So on forgot password, yeah, and that's all. And aside that too, we can handle the sign up and all these buttons. So I leave that to you to complete. Now let's add a little bit of convenience for our users. You realize from our screen when we are typing the password, we can change this keyboard, show a keyboard that allows you to enter the email easily, and so applies to other input fields. So you can choose different kind of input field so that the keyboard will change accordingly. So you see how the keyboard appeared. Let's add the convenient option to select the keyboard type and see how it will change as we type the email. you come to the text field and there's another property called keyboard option. So here you specify the keyboard type. So you have several options. You can show keyboard that show just numbers, or for password, for email, and then for phone, that's for calls. So for now we are interested in the email. And then another property you can pass for this one is the IME action. So that one determines what happens here. So you see this enter option here, you can change it to show next. So as you can see, this field here is opening. I mean, the enter is making it to open. So we can lock it by setting single line to true. So we'll make it just a single line. We'll set it to true so that it doesn't expand like this. Any input field to make it a single line. So let's add the IME actions. So we'll set it to next. On the email, we'll set it to next. Let's run it for you to see the effect of what I'm talking about. So now when you select the input field, the enter icon is gone and now next is shown at the bottom. Now we just have to implement the action that will happen when the user click on the next button. So to do that, you call a different property called keyboard action. So we have keyboard option and then keyboard action. So you call on next method. So you change the focus from the email field to the password field. So in order to do that, you have to create a new variable to manage the focus. Call the focus manager and then call move focus, pass focus direction to down. So we change the focus direction down. So let's test this and do the same for the password. So we get error, but when you try to type, you see that now the keyboard shows the @ symbols for you. So once you do something like test, then you get the @ directly, you get the suggestions also. And when you click on the next button, it takes you to the next field, which is the password. Okay, and you have done over here. You have done. So once you click on done, it's supposed to log you in. So you can copy the same action we set for the email and then set the same thing for the password. So inside the password, you change the IME action to done. Then here you clear focus because it is the last one. So you clear focus. And that's all for the password. So if you have the last field, you have to clear focus and then change the button to done. And then for the done, once you click on that done, then we have to log the user in. So over here, you can call validate and login function again, and then it will trigger the login process for you. So the last thing we want to do right now is to enable the progress bar. Whilst you click on the done button and you are waiting for the login process to complete, you want to actually show a progress bar to the user. So let's see how to implement that. So the first thing is you create a variable to track the login process. You call it it's loading. So from the start, we set the it's loading to false. Inside our login button, when we call the validate and login method, we have to update the it's loading to true. So inside the button, instead of showing the text directly, we will show the progress indicator when it is loading, and when it is done, then we show the text. So to do that, I'll wrap this in a curly bracket, and then I'll use if statement and say if the progress bar is true, then we'll do this, else show the test. So inside this curly bracket, we'll call the circular progress indicator. So you can also change the color for that by using the color dot white. And then it has a modifier. So set the size to something like 24. Now let's test it. So you realize that although we have error, the loading spinner is still working. This is because we set the loading spinner to true before we call the validate method. So you have to remove it and call it inside the validation method. So you come here inside the function. It is only when it is valid then you show the loading spinner. Now we can test it again. So now let's try the login button. So now you see that once there is error, the loading spinner is not working. If enter something and press the login, so you see that the progress bar or the loading spinner is showing. Now let's test it. When you click on the button and there's nothing in the box, you see this error message. Let's enter something and click on. So when you click on done, now the button is disabled because of this enable property that we've set. So whilst the login process is in progress, you disable the button and allow it to run and complete, and then either moves you to the home screen or throw some error based on it. We are almost done. We can see the UI is matching the design that we started with. And if you test the responsiveness, you realize that it is not scrollable. So we can also make it responsive by making it scrollable when the user rotates the screen. So to fix that, we'll come to the column holding the entire screen and set a property on the modifier called vertical scroll, and then pass a property called remember scroll state. So let's test it. Let's rotate the screen and test the responsiveness. Now our design is more responsive. The user can rotate the screen and still use it. So this took a lot of time, but let's quickly see what we've learned. So we've learned how to break down a simple UI design into Android components or composables. We started by building with basic components like the text, the box, until we are able to design this complete complex layout. We use state management to track the password and then email the user is passing. We added validation, loading states, and then keyboard handling. We also passed the callbacks for handling the login, click, the forgot password, and then sign up. So I entreat you to complete the other screen, that's the sign up screen, and follow the steps that we use by identifying the individual components from the design you want to build, and then finally translate those design or those components into a full screen like this. If this helped you understand Compose better, hit that like button, subscribe for more Android development tutorial. Drop a comment, what UI should we build next? Until next time, keep composing.